Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all an update to my Ghostrick Yugioh deck profile for March 2021. Was slowly rebuilding the Ghostrick deck and got a good majority of the deck finished, so I figured an update was due for it. For those of you that don't know, the Ghostricks are a group of monsters that focus on just having your monsters face down, benefiting from having your opponent's monsters placed face down onto the field. So a good majority of their cards revolve around setting cards on the field and then just disrupting your opponent's plays before they can link summon, because link summoning is definitely a weakness of the deck since they can't be placed in defense position and therefore cannot be placed face down on the field. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. Now, for some of the more expensive cards in the deck, like Ghostrick Lantern and Ghostrick Mary, I have one replacement for each one, and that is just a Ghostrick Jack Frost, which I normally wouldn't run in the deck, but if you're missing any copies of Lantern or Mary, you can substitute them with Jack Frost until you get those additional copies, because you definitely do want to run 3 of each. So to start off, we're running 3 Ghostrick Lantern. It cannot be normal summoned unless you control a Ghostrick monster. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, or when a Ghostrick monster you control is targeted for an attack, you can negate the attack if you do special summon this card from your hand in face down defense position. So this just gives you an easy monster on the field to make use of, and then just being able to negate your opponent's attack. It's basically like a hand trap for the battle phase, having just protection for your Ghostrick monsters, which can be pretty vulnerable with their low attack and defense, depending on which ones you have on the field. So being able to rely on 3 Lantern for that protection definitely does come in handy for the overall setup, so then you can go into some of the bigger plays in the deck, which are the Xyz summon of your different Ghostrick monsters. I also run 3 Ghostrick Mary, once again substituting one of them for the 1 Ghostrick Jack Frost. It cannot be normal summon unless you control a Ghostrick monster. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When you take damage, you can discard this card and special summon 1 Ghostrick monster from your deck in face down defense position. You won't use the effect of Ghostrick Mary once per turn. So this card just gives you access to any of your other Ghostrick monsters that you run in the deck. Very, very useful there. Since it's just when you take damage, there's a good amount of time that this will happen. Even if it's just a effect damage, you can summon out any of your Ghostrick monsters with the use of Ghostrick Mary. And we have some other options to search this card out and making completely useless for your opponent with one of the new spells. I would say it's more of a generic spell that you can run and make full use of in the deck. For some of the other Ghostrick monsters, I also run 3 Ghostrick Fairy. It cannot be normal summon unless you control a Ghostrick monster, which is shared with all of the Ghostrick main deck monsters. You can change this card to face down defense position, and when this card is flipped face up, you can target 1 Ghostrick card in your graveyard, set that card, but banish it when it leaves the field. Then you can change face up monsters your opponent control to face down defense position up to the number of set cards you control. So with the more set cards you have on the field, the more you can make use of Ghostrick Fairy for that setup, being the once per turn change to face down defense position, and then flipping it up gives you resources. It's a very useful card, and why we're running 3 of it in the deck. It'll set up most of your plays revolving around your different Ghostrick monsters, and the fact that we have different Xyz monsters in the extra deck to make use of all the different Ghostrick cards. And I also run 3 Ghostrick Spectre with this one, with the restriction for the normal summon. Once per turn, you can change this face down card to face down, and when a Ghostrick monster is destroyed by opponent's card effect or by battle with the attacking monster and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand and face down defense position, and if you do, draw 1 card. So this is draw power and just more easy setup from your hand onto the field, making full use of Spectre for the additional special summon onto the field, and then just being able to have more and more setup on the field with this card, and then even just making use of other cards like your Ghostrick Lantern for protecting these cards makes it all the worth it as well. And I wanted to run a good majority of the level 1 Ghostrick monsters because they revolve around the other spell I'm running. So Ghostrick Mary, Lantern, and Spectre, all being the level 1s, definitely help with that card, which we'll go over when we get to the spells. I also run 3 Ghostrick Jiangshi with this one. You can change this card to face down defense position. When this card is flipped face up, you can add from your deck to your hand 1 Ghostrick monster whose level is less than or equal to the number of Ghostrick monsters you control. You can only use this effect of Ghostrick Jiangshi once per turn. It's search power. That's the best part about this card, just for the amount of Ghostrick monsters, and for, like I said, we run a good amount of different low-level Ghostrick monsters, so being able to have the search power for those cards makes this one all the better, because then it just opens up a good variety of different Ghostrick monsters we have all together. For some of the lower numbers for the Ghostricks, I also run 2 Ghostrick Duel. With this card, being able to set it face down, and during the end phase, change as many face-up monsters on the field as possible to face-down defense position. Then you can special summon 1 Ghostrick monster from your deck in face-down defense position whose level is less than or equal to the number of monsters flipped face-down by this effect. So it's basically like Jiangshi, just a little more setup to go into. That's why I'm only running 2 of it, because you do have search power in the form of Jiangshi to search out this card and then make use of its resource of just summoning monsters out onto the field quite easily as well. You have more of the defensive cards like Spectre and Lantern, but then other cards I would say a little more consistent for special summon, since it's when you take damage and you have to rely on the setup of Ghostrick Duel with cards like Ghostrick Mary, but still good if you have that setup to go into. I also run 2 Ghostrick Skeleton. With this one, it cannot be normal summoned unless you control a Ghostrick monster, and you can change this card to face down defense position when it's flipped face up. Banish cards on the top of your deck face down up to the number of Ghostrick monsters you control, and you can only use this effect of Ghostrick Skeleton once per turn. So with this card and its setup, banishing cards from the top of your opponent's deck face down is very, very scary, because then it just takes away resources that they could potentially draw into. And once again, only running 2 of it because you can easily set it up with some of your other cards in the deck. But like I said, if they just have a one-of card that they need for a big part of their engine in their deck, being able to take that away with Ghostrick Skeleton when you flip it face up is a pretty vital part to just disrupting your opponent's plays altogether. With the last of the Ghostrick monsters just being 1 Ghostrick Stein. Once per turn, you can change this card to face down defense position. When it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can add 1 Ghostrick Spell Trap from your deck to your hand. It's a searcher, but also having the highest attack of all the Ghostrick monsters that we're running. It can be useful for that kind of boss monster role, but a good amount of the different boss monsters, once again, will revolve around the Xyz monsters when we can summon them out. And that is it for the monsters. We'll now move on to the spells. Our main go-to field spell is Ghostrick Mansion. Monsters cannot attack face-down defense position monsters, but can attack directly. If all monsters their opponent controls are face-down defense position, all effect damage and battle damage inflicted by monsters other than Ghostrick monsters is halved. So this field spell is your protection for all of your face-down monsters. Your opponent can't attack you directly, but you can still have a good amount of your trap lineup be able to protect you from the playstyle that would stop your opponent altogether for that setup. So 3 Mansion, definitely needed. It's not a search field spell for any pluses or requirements, but it is needed for that setup. That's why I'm also running the 1 of the Terraforming, just to help with this overall search power and making sure you have your field spell that much easier set up on the field and ready to go. And for more of the fact that we have to focus on face-down cards on the field to make full use of the Ghostricks, I also run 3 Swords of Concealing Light. You destroy this card during your second standby phase after activation. When this card resolves, you change all monsters your opponent control to face-down defense position. Monsters your opponent control cannot change their battle position. So really, really powerful there. Once again, if you set your opponent's monsters before they can use them for a link summon, then that's the big benefit there. There are cards like Clara and Rushka, but they aren't normally seen as often for extra decks to use. So when you're going up against your opponent, this one definitely does come in handy for that. Just being able to stop them for 2 turns can give you enough time to also set up your go-to plays. I also run 2 of the new spell I spoke of, which is Jack in the Hand. This isn't actually specifically for a Ghostrick card play setup, but I like it. You reveal 3 level 1 monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent adds 1 to their hand, you add 1 to your hand, and you shuffle the 3rd into the deck. You can only activate 1 Jack in the Hand per turn. So our main go-to searches in the deck with this are Spectre, and then Mary, and also Lantern. You have these 3 cards to add for the option, and unless your opponent is playing Ghostricks, the card that they take from you won't really help them at all, because for the fact that it cannot be normal summoned unless you control a Ghostrick monster. So the best your opponent can do with this card is just set it on the field, which is just helping you set up for more and more of your cards on the field altogether, then giving you the Ghostrick of your choice with each one they search. Depending on which one they go for, it would be beneficial for you to either get Lantern or Mary to your hand for that setup. But most of the time, like I said, when they take that card, unless they're playing Ghostricks themselves, there's not much they can do with it unless just use it for a discard resource. And for some of the other cards, for the rest of the spells, just 2 Book of the Moon. With this one, it's just more setup for your cards on the field. You can even flip your own monsters face down, so being able to rely on that to do so is great just for reusing a lot of your different plays on the field with your Ghostrick cards. Moving on now to the traps. We do run a pretty good amount of different traps for the deck, with the main one being Ghostrick Scare. You target any number of face down defense position monsters you control, change them to face up defense position, but count the number of Ghostrick monsters among them. If you do change up to that that many face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position. So it's just a good trap that can make use of your setup for your opponent's cards, being able to then rely on this card for basically getting rid of your opponent's setup they may have on the field, but also making full use of your own cards on the field by basically giving you the Ghostrick effects when those cards are flipped face-up. Very, very useful, and why we're running 3 of it. And it's also searchable with some of the other Ghostrick cards that we are running. I also run 2 Ghostrick Vanish. You reveal 1 Ghostrick monster in your hand. This turn, Ghostrick cards you control and face-down defense position monsters you control cannot be targeted or destroyed by card effects. More protection, especially when you're going and investing in some of your Ghostrick Xyz monsters. So relying on this card for that setup is very, very useful just for being able to protect those cards. And all you have to do is reveal 1 Ghostrick monster in your hand. So once you do that, you have your setup ready to go and no fear of your opponent taking away from those cards. I also run 1 Ghostrick Break. With this one, when exactly 1 face-up Ghostrick monster you control, face-up no other cards is destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effect and sent to the graveyard. You can target 2 Ghostrick monsters in your graveyard and basically set and special summon those cards face down in defense position. It's really, really good that you can use this just for the 1 of Ghostrick card that you have on the field to use, because then you can rely on this card for taking care of those resources and then just giving you more on the field to use later on with those cards. It just works on the 1, say it's the 1 weakness of the card, so I'm only running 1 of it. You have search options for it. That's another thing to remember with this card, being able to search a Ghostrick card with it for that setup. So having any more of that for that play is really unneeded. I feel Vanish and Scare are plenty enough altogether along with this card. For some of the rest of the deck, for more setup going off of our set cards on the field, I also run 3 Needle Sealing. When there are 4 or more monsters on the field, destroy all face-up monsters. So even if your opponent has a Link monster and you can't get rid of that resource with your Ghostrick monsters by setting it on the field, you can at least use Needle Sealing to destroy that card, and a good amount of the time you'll have just Ghostrick monsters set on the field, so you won't destroy your own set cards. You can rely on this when your opponent tries to go for the Link spam play, and then just get around that by destroying it using your Needle Sealing. It's not even a once per turn, so if your opponent can then have more monsters set up on the field, you can set up multiple Needle Sealings on the field, activate the 1, they destroy all their resources. If they try and come back from it again, you have the second one ready to go as long as there are 4 or more monsters on the field, which you will have a good majority of different Ghostrick monsters on the field altogether, making full use of this card for sure as a power play trap. And that is it for the main deck. When I move on to the extra deck, I run 2 Ghostrick Alucard, with this one being your main go-to Xyz monster, or at least one of them. We have a bunch of different level Xyz monsters for the Ghostricks in the deck. You need 2 level 3 monsters to make it. Your opponent cannot target other Ghostrick monsters or any face-down defense position monsters for attacks. You can detach 1 Xyz material from this card to target 1 set card your opponent controls and destroy that target. You can only use this effect of Alucard once per turn. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 other Ghostrick card in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. So Alucard's basically recycle power, but also giving you options to destroy your opponent's set cards is what makes this card very, very scary altogether. No pun intended with the whole Ghostrick deck, but also for this recycle power, then you can just go into one of your other Xyz monsters, like your Ghostrick Dullahan, which we are running 2 of. I even considered running 3 of this card. With it, this card gains 200 attack for each Ghostrick card you control. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card to target 1 face-up monster on the field and have its attack until the end phase. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 other Ghostrick card in your graveyard and add that target to your hand. It says Ghostrick card just like Alucard, so it's not even limiting you to your monsters. You can even search back some of your Ghostrick spells or even your Ghostrick traps that you are running from the deck. So very, very useful for that recycle power, but the half attack with all the low attack Ghostrick monsters we run in the deck is very useful and comes in handy for getting over those cards. I also run 2 Ghostrick So Cute Boss. With this one, we have all the different ranks covered, rank 2, and 1 with Dullahan and 3 with Alucard. While you control another Ghostrick monster, your opponent cannot target this card for attacks. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card, then target 1 face-up monster on the field with attack less than or equal to the controlled attack of all Ghostrick monsters in the field and destroy it. And if you do, that monster cannot be used as long as you control a Ghostrick monster. So very, very scary to lock your opponent out of a monster with this card as well. We do run a good number of the level 2, with the main one being our Ghostrick Fairy to rely on summoning into this card. So once again, just 2 of each. You have the balance to go into all the different Ghostrick Xyz monsters, depending on which ones you have, but also with our main one being just the Xyz power, Ghostrick Angel of Mischief. You can also Xyz summon this card by using a Ghostrick Xyz monster, because we don't really run that many level 4, or I believe any Ghostrick level 4. So the main way you'll summon this card out is just by overlaying it on top of another Ghostrick Xyz monster, and then those materials are also attached onto it. When the number of Xyz on this card becomes 10, you win the duel. Once per turn, you can detach 1 Xyz material from this card to add 1 Ghostrick spell trap from your deck to your hand, and once per turn, you can attach 1 Ghostrick card from your hand to this card as Xyz material. So most of the time, you're not going to use the win condition. It's mostly just going to be used for searching out your different Ghostrick spell and traps, which when we're running, the one-ofs that I spoke of before, it's just that much easier to search it out. The fact that Jack in the Hand isn't a Ghostrick card, I would say, is the one weakness of the card, but still great to run just for more search power altogether. And then for some of the one-ofs for the Link monsters, I run 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice. Actually make that 2. I always forget when I have the 2 lined up like that. Just for the power boost to the Dark Attribute in the deck. The 1 Barricade Board Blocker, the 1 Link Karibo, and the 1 Nightmare Unicorn to finish off the Link monsters. Most of the time I do like to go into the Xyz monsters the most, since they are the main playstyle of the deck, but the Link monsters help also just when I need that additional push for extra deck setup. And as for your go-to plays, it all revolves around just you setting up your Ghostrick monsters on the field when they're flipped face up, or at least if you control that other Ghostrick monster, then you can normal summon the other ones without having to rely on, setting them on the field first. And then you have the option to go into the different Xyz plays you may rely on, or even just setting up, with this deck being pretty control-based for a good while, the amount of different cards that you can activate to either disrupt your opponent's plays or even just protect your own based on what you have set on the field, and then just going with more and more Ghostrick setup, having all of these ready to go on the field all together. Being able to have the pretty big defense that a good number of the Ghostricks have is just an added bonus as well, but also relying on when your opponent inflicts damage to you or when one of yours would attack, being able to set up more and more on the field for you to flip face up and make use of is the one playstyle you want to remember all together with this deck. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoy the video. It's definitely a fun deck, so definitely look into it if you're looking to build something that's also adorable, scary, but also, like I said, a different playstyle than a good number of other Yu-Gi-Oh decks we have. But until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.